The forensic technician's gloved hand hovered over the frozen soil sample, extracted from beneath the overpass where tire tracks had been preserved in ice for nearly 2 decades. Under the laboratory's halogen lights, a single fiber emerged from the evidence bag, its chemical composition matching nothing in the original 2004 investigation file. The room fell silent as the spectrometer began its analysis, revealing a polymer blend that wouldn't enter commercial production until 2006. If you like stories like this, make sure to subscribe and like the video. The case that would eventually become known as the Maryland Route 32 investigation began on the morning of November 27, 2004, the day after Thanksgiving. A maintenance crew clearing storm drains along the highway corridor between Columbia and Clarksville discovered a personal belonging that would set in motion one of the longest unsolved cases in Howard County history. The item was a woman's leather boot, size 7, partially buried in leaf debris approximately 40 feet from the roadway. The boot showed no signs of weathering consistent with outdoor exposure, suggesting recent placement. Inside the boot, investigators found a Maryland driver's license belonging to 22-year-old Amanda Christine Pemberton. Amanda had been reported missing by her roommate on November 25, 2004, when she failed to return from what was supposed to be a brief trip to the grocery store in Ellicott City. Her vehicle, a 1998 Honda Civic, was found abandoned in the parking lot of a shopping center on Route 40, keys still in the ignition, engine cold. Surveillance footage from the grocery store showed Amanda completing her purchase at approximately 8:47 p.m. on November 24. She was seen leaving through the automatic doors carrying 2 bags. The footage showed her walking toward the parking area, but the cameras did not cover the lot itself. That was the last verified sighting of Amanda Pemberton alive. The initial investigation treated Amanda's disappearance as a potential abduction. Howard County Police established a command center and began canvassing the area around the shopping center. Amanda's family arrived from Pennsylvania within hours of the report. Her parents described their daughter as responsible, employed as a dental hygienist in Columbia, with no history of mental health crises or substance abuse. She had recently become engaged to her boyfriend of 3 years, a graduate student at Johns Hopkins University. There was no indication Amanda intended to disappear voluntarily. Her apartment showed no signs of disturbance. Her bank accounts remained untouched. Her cell phone, recovered from her vehicle, showed no unusual calls or messages in the days leading up to her disappearance. The discovery of the boot intensified the search. Cadaver dogs were deployed along Route 32 and the surrounding wooded areas. The region's terrain consisted of dense forest interspersed with suburban development, with numerous access roads, hiking trails, and private properties complicating search efforts. November's early darkness and dropping temperatures added urgency to the operation. Maryland State Police joined the effort, bringing additional resources including helicopter surveillance and dive teams to check nearby reservoirs and the Patuxent River tributaries. On December 3, 2004, a ground search team located Amanda's body in a ravine approximately 2 miles from where the boot had been found. The location was accessible only by a narrow fire road that branched off Route 32, leading into state forest land. The body was partially concealed beneath fallen branches and forest debris. The medical examiner determined that Amanda had died from asphyxiation, with evidence suggesting manual strangulation. The condition of the body indicated death had occurred within 24 hours of her disappearance. There were no signs of sexual assault. Amanda's clothing was intact except for the missing boot. Her jewelry, including her engagement ring, remained on her person, ruling out robbery as a motive. The autopsy revealed additional details that would prove significant years later. Trace evidence recovered from Amanda's clothing included soil samples, plant matter, and several synthetic fibers that did not match her own clothing or anything in her vehicle. Beneath her fingernails, investigators found skin cells that were sent for DNA analysis. The results identified male DNA that did not match anyone in the existing criminal databases. This unknown male DNA became the primary investigative lead, though it produced no immediate suspects. Detectives constructed a timeline of Amanda's final hours. After leaving the grocery store, she should have arrived home within 15 minutes. Her route would have taken her north on Route 29, a straightforward drive she made regularly. Investigators theorized that something caused her to deviate from this route or that she was forced to do so. The abandoned vehicle suggested an encounter in the parking lot itself, but without surveillance coverage of that area, the exact sequence of events remained speculative. Witnesses were interviewed extensively. Several shoppers recalled seeing a Honda Civic in the lot around the time in question, but none reported seeing Amanda or observing any suspicious activity. The investigation pursued multiple theories. Amanda's boyfriend was thoroughly investigated and cleared through alibi verification and DNA exclusion. Her coworkers, friends, and acquaintances were interviewed and eliminated as suspects. Police examined whether Amanda had been targeted specifically or if this was a crime of opportunity. The location where her body was found suggested the perpetrator had knowledge of the area's geography, particularly the isolated fire roads that were not marked on standard maps. This led investigators to focus on individuals with local ties, including utility workers, forestry personnel, hunters, and outdoor enthusiasts familiar with the terrain. As weeks became months, the case began to cool. Tips that initially flooded the police hotline decreased in frequency and relevance. Media coverage, intense in the immediate aftermath, gradually faded as newer stories captured public attention. Amanda's family maintained pressure on law enforcement, organizing annual vigils and keeping her case in the public consciousness. They established a reward fund and worked with missing persons advocacy groups to prevent the case from being forgotten. Yet despite these efforts, no significant breaks materialized. The unknown male DNA remained the single most promising piece of evidence, but without a match, it provided no avenue for prosecution. By 2006, the case was officially designated as cold. The lead detective retired in 2009, passing the file to a new generation of investigators who periodically reviewed the evidence but made no progress. The case file was stored in the Howard County Police Archives, joining dozens of other unsolved cases that represented failures of the justice system to provide closure to grieving families. Amanda's parents aged through their grief, maintaining hope that someday they would learn who killed their daughter and why. The breakthrough that would eventually solve Amanda's murder came not from traditional detective work, but from advances in forensic technology and an unrelated criminal investigation in 2023. A string of residential burglaries in Montgomery County led to the arrest of a 47-year-old man named Marcus Allen Whitmore. Following his arrest, Whitmore's DNA was entered into the combined DNA index system as part of standard procedure for felony arrests. The system generated an unexpected hit, matching the unknown male DNA recovered from beneath Amanda Pemberton's fingernails 19 years earlier. Howard County detectives were immediately notified of the match. The case, dormant for nearly 2 decades, suddenly became active again. Investigators began building a profile of Marcus Whitmore, examining his history and whereabouts in 2004. What they discovered revealed a man whose life intersected with Amanda's final hours in ways that had never been detected during the original investigation. Marcus Allen Whitmore was 28 years old in November 2004, living in a rental property in Jessup, Maryland, approximately 8 miles from where Amanda Pemberton's body was discovered. Employment records showed Whitmore had worked as a delivery driver for a regional heating and cooling supply company, a position that required him to travel throughout Howard County making deliveries to construction sites and residential properties. His route on November 24, 2004, had taken him to multiple locations in the Ellicott City area, placing him in the general vicinity of the shopping center where Amanda was last seen. This information had never surfaced during the original investigation because police had focused on individuals with direct connections to Amanda rather than conducting a broader canvass of everyone who might have been in the area that evening. Detectives obtained Whitmore's employment records from 2004, which the supply company had retained as part of their business archives. The delivery manifests showed that Whitmore had completed his final delivery of the day at 6:15 p.m. on November 24, signing off on paperwork at a construction site in Columbia. Company policy required drivers to return vehicles to the warehouse by 7:00 p.m., but the manifests indicated Whitmore had returned his truck at 9:42 p.m. that evening, nearly 3 hours late. The explanation noted in the log stated vehicle maintenance issues, but no repair records existed to corroborate this claim. The gap in Whitmore's documented timeline corresponded precisely with the window during which Amanda disappeared. Further investigation into Whitmore's background revealed a pattern of behavior that had escalated over the years since Amanda's death. His criminal record prior to 2004 consisted of minor offenses including disorderly conduct and a DUI, nothing that would have flagged him as a violent offender. However, in the years following 2004, Whitmore accumulated arrests for stalking, harassment, and assault. In 2007, he was charged with following a woman to her home and attempting to force entry, though the charges were reduced to trespassing as part of a plea agreement. In 2011, he was arrested for assaulting a girlfriend, receiving probation. The pattern suggested a propensity for violence against women that had either begun with or been catalyzed by Amanda's murder. Detectives assigned to the reopened case included veterans who remembered the original investigation and younger investigators trained in modern forensic techniques. They began by re-examining all physical evidence collected in 2004, applying current DNA analysis methods that were more sensitive and comprehensive than those available 19 years earlier. The synthetic fibers found on Amanda's clothing were subjected to advanced microscopic analysis and chemical profiling. The results indicated the fibers originated from automotive carpeting, consistent with commercial vehicle flooring from the late 1990s and early 2000s. This discovery aligned with the theory that Amanda had been transported in Whitmore's delivery truck. The investigative team worked to reconstruct Whitmore's movements on the evening of November 24, 2004. They located his former supervisor, now retired, who recalled the late return of the truck, but had accepted Whitmore's explanation without question at the time. The supervisor remembered Whitmore as generally reliable but occasionally unpredictable, sometimes calling in sick without notice or arriving late to shifts. No one from the company had been interviewed during the original investigation, because there had been no reason to connect a delivery driver to Amanda's disappearance. Detectives obtained search warrants for Whitmore's current residence, vehicle, and electronic devices. The search of his home in Laurel, Maryland, revealed disturbing materials, including folders of newspaper clippings about unsolved crimes against women in the Baltimore and Washington metropolitan area. Among these clippings were articles about Amanda Pemberton's disappearance and death. Whitmore had underlined certain passages and made marginal notes, though these writings were cryptic and did not constitute a direct confession. The discovery suggested an obsessive interest in the case that went beyond normal public curiosity. Digital forensics analysis of Whitmore's computer revealed internet search history that included repeated queries about the Amanda Pemberton case over the years. He had visited memorial pages, read case updates, and viewed news archives. This pattern of revisiting the case was consistent with psychological profiles of offenders who maintained emotional connections to their crimes. Additionally, investigators found that Whitmore had searched for information about DNA evidence preservation, cold case investigations, and statute of limitations for various crimes, suggesting awareness that he might eventually be connected to Amanda's murder. The investigation expanded to determine whether Whitmore might be connected to other unsolved cases. Detectives cross-referenced his known locations and travel patterns with unsolved disappearances and assaults throughout Maryland. While no definitive links were established, several cases warranted further examination. A 2006 assault in Anne Arundel County bore similarities to Amanda's case, though the victim in that instance had survived and her attacker had not been identified. Investigators arranged for the survivor to view a photo array that included Whitmore's image, but she was unable to make a positive identification after so many years. Building a prosecutable case required more than DNA evidence alone. Prosecutors needed to establish opportunity, means, and circumstantial evidence that would convince a jury beyond reasonable doubt. The investigative team worked methodically through every aspect of Whitmore's life in 2004, interviewing former coworkers, neighbors, and acquaintances. One former coworker recalled Whitmore making inappropriate comments about women he encountered during deliveries, describing them in crude terms and speculating about their personal lives. Another coworker remembered Whitmore returning to the warehouse on the evening of November 24, appearing agitated and sweating despite the cold weather, claiming he had been dealing with a mechanical problem on the truck. The delivery truck Whitmore had driven in 2004 had long since been sold and scrapped, eliminating any possibility of forensic examination of the vehicle itself. However, company maintenance records showed the truck had been serviced on November 29, 2004, with notes indicating the interior had been cleaned thoroughly at Whitmore's request. The timing of this cleaning, just days after Amanda's body was discovered, raised significant suspicion. The service technician who performed the work had retired but was located in Florida. He recalled the job because Whitmore had specifically requested deep cleaning of the cargo area and had paid for the service personally rather than submitting it through the company, which was unusual. Investigators obtained financial records for Whitmore dating back to 2004. Bank statements showed ATM withdrawals on November 24 consistent with his known location during the day, but also revealed a cash withdrawal of $200 at 8:23 p.m. from an ATM located in the same shopping center where Amanda's vehicle was found. This placed Whitmore at the scene within the critical time frame. The ATM transaction had never been discovered during the original investigation because detectives had not identified Whitmore as a person of interest and therefore had no reason to examine his financial activity. The receipt from this transaction still existed in archived bank records, and surveillance footage from the ATM, though degraded, showed a male figure consistent with Whitmore's appearance and vehicle type. The Howard County State's Attorney's Office reviewed the accumulated evidence and determined it was sufficient to pursue murder charges. On March 12, 2024, Marcus Allen Whitmore was arrested at his workplace and charged with first-degree murder in the death of Amanda Christine Pemberton. The arrest occurred without incident, with Whitmore offering no resistance. He was transported to the Howard County Detention Center and held without bail. News of the arrest spread rapidly through the community, shocking residents who had followed the case for 2 decades and stunning those who knew Whitmore personally. Amanda's family, notified of the arrest prior to the public announcement, released a statement expressing relief that someone would finally be held accountable for their daughter's death. Her mother, now 73 years old, stated that she had never stopped believing justice would eventually come, though she had feared she might not live to see it. The legal proceedings began with a preliminary hearing in April 2024, where prosecutors presented their evidence to establish probable cause for trial. The hearing took place in the Howard County Circuit Court, with significant media presence documenting every aspect of the proceedings. Whitmore appeared in court wearing civilian clothing, his demeanor calm and expressionless as prosecutors outlined the case against him. His defense attorney, a public defender assigned to the case, argued that the DNA evidence alone was insufficient to prove murder and that the circumstantial evidence was subject to alternative interpretations. The judge, after reviewing the evidence presented, found probable cause and ordered Whitmore to stand trial. Pretrial motions consumed the following months as both sides prepared their strategies. The defense filed motions to suppress certain evidence, arguing that the search of Whitmore's residence had exceeded the scope of the warrant and that some materials seized were not relevant to the case. The prosecution successfully argued that all evidence was properly obtained and directly pertinent to establishing motive and consciousness of guilt. The defense also sought to exclude testimony from former coworkers regarding Whitmore's comments about women, claiming such statements were prejudicial and did not prove involvement in Amanda's death. The court ruled that these statements were admissible as evidence of pattern and intent. The trial began in October 2024, nearly 20 years after Amanda Pemberton's death. Jury selection took 3 days, with attorneys from both sides carefully questioning potential jurors about their ability to remain impartial, despite the case's age and media coverage. The final jury consisted of 8 men and 4 women, ranging in age from 31 to 68. Opening statements began on a cold morning that reminded courtroom observers of the weather conditions that had prevailed during the original investigation 2 decades earlier. The prosecution's case was methodical and comprehensive. The lead prosecutor walked the jury through the timeline of November 24, 2004, establishing Amanda's movements through surveillance footage, credit card records, and witness testimony. Forensic experts testified about the DNA evidence recovered from beneath Amanda's fingernails, explaining how the genetic material matched Marcus Whitmore with a probability exceeding 1 in several trillion. The testimony was technical, but delivered in language accessible to lay jurors, emphasizing the certainty of the scientific match. Additional forensic testimony addressed the synthetic fibers found on Amanda's clothing. An expert in textile analysis explained how the fibers matched the type of commercial vehicle carpeting used in delivery trucks during that period. While the specific truck could not be examined due to its disposal years earlier, company records and photographs of similar vehicles provided supporting context. The prosecution introduced evidence of the truck's deep cleaning just days after Amanda's body was discovered, characterizing this as an attempt to destroy evidence. The ATM transaction placing Whitmore at the shopping center during the critical time frame received substantial attention during testimony. Financial records specialists explained the documentation trail, and the degraded surveillance footage from the ATM was enhanced and presented to the jury. While the image quality prevented absolute identification, the prosecution argued that the combination of the transaction record, the vehicle type visible in the footage, and Whitmore's inability to account for his whereabouts during those hours constituted compelling evidence of his presence at the scene. Former coworkers testified about Whitmore's behavior and statements regarding women. Their testimony painted a picture of someone with inappropriate attitudes and poor impulse control. The coworker who recalled Whitmore's agitated state upon returning to the warehouse on November 24 described his appearance in detail, noting that Whitmore had seemed unusually flustered and eager to leave. The service technician who performed the truck cleaning testified via video deposition from Florida, recounting Whitmore's specific requests and the unusual nature of the personal payment for what should have been a company expense. The prosecution also presented evidence from Whitmore's home, including the newspaper clippings and computer search history. A forensic psychologist testified about the significance of offenders maintaining interest in their crimes over extended periods, explaining how this behavior reflected ongoing psychological engagement with the offense. The testimony was carefully limited to general patterns rather than specific diagnosis of Whitmore's mental state, avoiding issues that might complicate the legal proceedings. The defense strategy centered on creating reasonable doubt about the prosecution's narrative. Defense attorneys argued that DNA under fingernails could be transferred through innocent contact, and that the presence of Whitmore's DNA proved only that he had encountered Amanda at some point, not that he had killed her. They suggested alternative scenarios, including the possibility that Amanda had encountered Whitmore during one of his deliveries earlier in the day, or in some other context, that would explain the DNA presence without criminal intent. Regarding the ATM transaction, the defense argued that Whitmore's presence at the shopping center was not inherently suspicious, and that many people used that facility during the evening hours. They challenged the clarity of the surveillance footage and questioned whether the figure captured on camera was definitively Whitmore. The defense also addressed the truck cleaning, suggesting that routine maintenance and cleaning were normal practices for someone who worked with vehicles professionally, and that the timing could be coincidental. Defense witnesses included character references who described Whitmore as a reliable worker and neighbor in recent years. These witnesses acknowledged his prior criminal record, but emphasized that he had maintained employment and avoided serious legal trouble for over a decade. The defense attempted to create a portrait of someone who had matured and changed since his younger years, though this strategy was complicated by the harassment and assault charges that post-dated Amanda's murder. The defense chose not to have Whitmore testify, exercising his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. This decision was strategic, as prosecutors would have been able to cross-examine him extensively about inconsistencies in his accounts and his documented history of violence against women. The absence of defendant testimony is common in criminal trials, and judges instruct jurors that no negative inference should be drawn from this choice, though its impact on jury perception remains a subject of legal debate. Closing arguments took place over 2 days in late November 2024, exactly 20 years after Amanda Pemberton's disappearance. The prosecution's closing statement methodically reconstructed the events of November 24, 2004, weaving together the DNA evidence, the ATM transaction, the unexplained gap in Whitmore's timeline, the truck cleaning, and his subsequent behavior into a cohesive narrative of guilt. The prosecutor emphasized that each piece of evidence individually might permit alternative explanations, but collectively, they formed an overwhelming pattern that pointed inexorably to Whitmore as Amanda's killer. The prosecutor reminded jurors of their obligation to deliver justice for a young woman whose life had been stolen and whose family had waited 2 decades for accountability. The defense closing argument challenged the prosecution's certainty, arguing that reasonable doubt existed in multiple aspects of the case. The defense emphasized gaps in the evidence, noting that no witnesses had seen Whitmore and Amanda together, that no one had testified to seeing Amanda's vehicle being moved, and that the prosecution's timeline required jurors to make inferential leaps based on circumstantial connections rather than direct proof. The defense urged jurors to consider whether the evidence truly proved guilt beyond reasonable doubt, or merely suggested a possibility that Whitmore might have been involved. The jury received instructions from the judge regarding the legal standards they must apply, including definitions of reasonable doubt, the presumption of innocence, and the requirement for unanimous agreement on guilt. Deliberations began on December 2, 2024. The jury requested to review certain pieces of evidence during their deliberations, including the forensic testimony regarding DNA analysis and the financial records documenting the ATM transaction. After 2 days of deliberation, the jury notified the court that they had reached a verdict. The courtroom was filled to capacity when the verdict was announced on December 4, 2024. Amanda's family sat in the front row, her mother gripping her husband's hand as the jury foreperson stood to deliver the decision. The verdict was guilty of first-degree murder. Whitmore showed no visible reaction as the verdict was read. Several jurors later spoke with media representatives, explaining that the combination of DNA evidence and the pattern of circumstantial evidence had convinced them of Whitmore's guilt. One juror stated that the truck cleaning immediately after the discovery of Amanda's body had been particularly persuasive, as it demonstrated consciousness of guilt and an attempt to destroy evidence. Sentencing took place in January 2025. Maryland law provided for a sentence of life imprisonment for first-degree murder. The sentencing hearing allowed victim impact statements, giving Amanda's family an opportunity to address the court and Whitmore directly. Amanda's mother spoke about the daughter she had lost, describing Amanda's kindness, her professional ambitions, and the family she would never have. She described 20 years of living with uncertainty and grief, attending memorial services each year on the anniversary of Amanda's disappearance, and wondering whether justice would ever be served. She addressed Whitmore directly, stating that while the conviction provided some measure of closure, nothing could restore what had been taken from their family. The judge sentenced Marcus Allen Whitmore to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. In delivering the sentence, the judge noted the particularly callous nature of the crime, the defendant's attempts to conceal his involvement, and his pattern of violence against women in the years following Amanda's murder. The judge stated that the sentence reflected both the severity of the crime and the need to protect society from further harm. Whitmore was immediately remanded to the custody of the Maryland Department of Corrections to begin serving his sentence. The resolution of Amanda Pemberton's case brought attention to the broader issue of cold cases and the role of advancing forensic technology in solving decades-old crimes. The Howard County Police Department held a press conference following the sentencing, acknowledging the persistence of Amanda's family in keeping the case in the public consciousness and crediting advances in DNA analysis technology with making the breakthrough possible. The department noted that dozens of cold cases remain unsolved in Maryland, and encouraged anyone with information about unsolved crimes to come forward, emphasizing that evidence preservation and technological progress meant that cases once considered unsolvable might now be within reach of resolution. The case also prompted discussions about systematic review of cold cases using modern forensic techniques. The Maryland State Police announced an initiative to re-examine DNA evidence in unsolved cases from prior decades, applying current analysis methods that were unavailable when the crimes were originally investigated. This initiative reflected a growing national trend of cold case units, utilizing genetic genealogy, improved DNA sensitivity, and comprehensive database comparisons to identify perpetrators who had evaded justice for years or decades. For Amanda's family, the conviction and sentencing provided a form of closure that had seemed impossible for 20 years. Her mother stated in an interview following the sentencing that, while nothing could bring Amanda back, knowing that her killer had been identified and would spend the rest of his life in prison, allowed the family to finally grieve without the additional burden of uncertainty. The family planned to hold a private memorial service for Amanda, something they had delayed for 2 decades, hoping that justice would first be served. The case file on Amanda Christine Pemberton was officially closed in February 2025. The evidence, including the DNA samples, fiber analysis results, financial records, and all documentation from both the original investigation and the reopened case, was archived in the Howard County Records System. The file would remain accessible for legal purposes, including any potential appeals, though legal experts considered the evidence sufficiently strong that successful appeal seemed unlikely. Whitmore's attorneys filed a notice of appeal within the required timeframe, but the grounds cited were procedural rather than challenging the fundamental evidence of guilt. In Ellicott City, where Amanda had lived and worked, a small memorial garden was established in her honor through donations from community members who had followed the case for 2 decades. The garden, located near the dental office where Amanda had been employed, featured a bench with a plaque bearing her name and the years of her life. The memorial served as a quiet space for reflection and a reminder of a life taken too soon. Amanda's former colleagues and patients continued to remember her, sharing stories of her professionalism and kindness with younger staff members who had never met her but knew her through the case that had defined a generation of local residents. The shopping center parking lot where Amanda's vehicle was found abandoned remained largely unchanged, though the grocery store had been remodeled several times over the intervening years. The stretch of Route 32 where her boot was discovered, and the fire road leading to where her body was located remained, as they had been in 2004, quiet roads through Maryland woods that betrayed no evidence of the tragedy they had witnessed. The resolution of the case closed a chapter in Howard County history, though for those who had known Amanda, the memory of her life and the injustice of her death would remain permanent fixtures of their personal histories, now accompanied by the knowledge that her killer would face consequences for his actions.